Welcome back to the Plan Your Federal Retirement Podcast. I'm your co-host, Micah Shilanski, and we have a very special episode today because as we're recording this, we are in the heart of tax season. And this is a planning season that we really dive into deeply with clients. And so we wanted to have a good episode and talk to the other advisors on our team and kind of all come together. What are some themes? What are things we're seeing with clients, with our federal employees, whether they're working or they're retired, and there are things that are coming up right now. So we got a great crew of advisors on here to kind of go through with everything. And I'm sure we're all going to have great things to say. So listeners, please forgive us when we probably jump in and overtalk each other. We'll try to limit it, but there's so much great information to share. So to start it off, we have the legendary Floyd Shilanski. Pops, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. We also have from Washington, Christian Sakamoto, which our listeners know. Christian, how's it going?
Micah, doing very well. A little under the weather, but getting better, feeling much better. So hopefully all's well up there in Alaska.
Perfect. So is that like April 15th as tax time's coming, you're going to get better and better as that's closer or?
Sure hope it's sooner than that.
Fair enough. And then also from Alaska, we have JT Ferrin. Thanks, JT, for joining us.
Thank you, Micah. I'm excited to be here.
We spent, I don't know how many meetings a day that we're having right now as a team, but we spent a lot of time this last week in front of clients. This is what we love. We love client questions to be able to come in and say, how do we improve your life? How do we improve your situation and really get that roadmap out there for your success? And Pops, one of the things you taught me so long ago, and it's still true today. So this is me saying my dad was right, I guess, right? But it's still true today is cash flow is the heartbeat of retirement.
In 50 years we've been doing this is that, things when cash flow gets tight, communication gets tight. And in relationships, when communication gets tight, things get kind of rocky, all right? And then being able to predict cash flow is so important. And one of the nice things about the federals or the feds is that we have predictable pensions. We have predictable TSPs. We can actually do it, what we refer to as a retirement timeline, how the funds are going to come in or diminish or increase. Love the timeline because now it becomes calculable, right? I don't have to sell the house because of this. I don't have to do that because here's the income. Here's when Social Security clicks in. Here's how we're going to phase this thing out. The biggest fear that I see so many times, especially with our feds, life expectancy. And that's the real key is you tell me the day you're going to die. I tell you how you spend your money. The problem is we don't know when the COD pops up, right, Micah?
That's 100% right? Not all of us on our birth certificates have that COD, right? For those listeners that are maybe new to the pod, that sounds crap outdate, right? How long are we going to live? And as cash flow is that heartbeat of retirement, it all starts with how much are we spending today? Now that can be a hard question sometimes to answer. And I'll say that sometimes clients resist kind of coming in and wanting to chat with us because they don't know the answers to these questions. Well, great news. That's our job as advisors to help answer what some of these questions are. And it's how we're going to be spending our money in retirement. In fact, Christian, you and I were talking before we went live about it's not just the cash flow of like day-to-day expenses we need to pay for. Yes, we got to take care of those. But what about those extra things we want to do in retirement? So what's an example of something we'd want to do in retirement that'd be extra? How do we think about that from a cash flow perspective?
Yeah, Micah. So the biggest example and one that came up a couple of times just this week with clients was when they retire, one of them is planning retirement, would be their travel goals that they have. And so going on these different vacations, which I'm very much encouraging them to put a list together of all the places they want to travel to, when they want to go, how long they want to go, who they want to go with, right? Start visualizing what their retirement goals are, especially when it comes to travel. So that is one in particular as it relates to cash flow is how do we plan for that when my normal day-to-day expenses are X and now I'm going to increase it because of all the different travel goals. Now it's going to go to Y. How are we going to get that difference accounted for? And so, good news is we came up with a good plan. And looking at what Floyd mentioned, looking at your awesome fixed income that you have between your pension income, eventually what Social Security will be, and then filling that gap with different investment income, right? For anything that we're short. And there's going to be a typical projection to say, okay, normally this is how much we could spend in our retirement years. But if we know we're going to be traveling a little bit more for a little bit longer, we need to have a goal to be able to replace that income for maybe a brief period of time while we're in our go-go years, so to speak, of our retirement. And so what I did was I drew out that retirement income timeline to show what that looks like and to show them, okay, these years we're taking out more money. And then after this period, then it's going to look a little bit different. And it was really very much appreciated to see, okay, visually, where is this money going to come from?
Now, Christian, I really like that, right? Now we have a tool, right, to help visually to illustrate it, which is great. But it's also the aspect of saying, how is retirement going to be different? And spending is different, as you're alluding to, in retirement with cash flow, because when every day is a weekend, how are you going to spend your money? And it's kind of a good pause moment that says, when I'm not going into work every day, where do I want to be? How am I going to spend that money? And to answer your question, kind of where is that going to come from? Now, Christian, question for you. That was an example that you gave for kind of travel. But what if a client had different or larger expenses that were kind of coming up with the same concept? Could you use that same theory in order to answer, other cash flow questions the client might have?
Absolutely, right. And so biggest thing is going to be developing that timeline. You have to come up with a distribution rate when it comes to your investments, right? We have to have some certain set of rules that we have to follow to make sure we're not going to run out of money post-retirement. That's probably the number one goal with our clients. So as long as we develop those principles, then you can apply that for a travel goal. You can apply that for moving. If you're going to be relocating in retirement, you could be doing that for different house projects. Maybe it's buying a car. All of these are similarly related to each other. You just kind of have to make sure you have the right rules set in place.
Yeah, right. As we jokingly say, nobody wants to go back to work in retirement when they're 80 years young. So what's that plan that you're going to have in order to keep up with cash flow? Now, Pops, as we go through and we talk about cash flow, the greatest expense any of our clients are going to have almost across the board is something they're not even thinking about in retirement time. Now, our listeners are, because they're pretty astute and they understand how these things are going on. But so many times we're talking to people and they don't get the things that are coming up, that largest expenses they're going to have. And you know what it is? It's your family. Well, not just your family, it's your aunt. It's that favorite Aunt Iris, which is so expensive in retirement. Right, Dad?
That's exactly right. How many times, and you've heard me say this over and over and over, the best retirement plan is the check to who bounces?
The Undertaker. But he didn't like that very much. So then he said, make it the IRS.
Right? And then that's back to that question about the COD date. If we know the date we're going to expire, it's easy to backfill. The real question is today, with artificial limbs, surgeries, lifestyle changes, better lifestyle changes, if you will, the actual timeline is growing, isn't it? How many years ago was it that we talked to that group of centurions that the average age was like 105? Hard to even get your head around. But with lifestyle changes and all, we are living longer. And so many times when we talk to our feds, they say, well, I know Joe. Joe retired and 2 years later he died. So I want to spend all my money. One of the things that I really like to see people, and I tell them every day, we don't compare you with Joe. We don't compare you with someone else the same age. We compare you with you. Your lifestyle, your expenses, the things you want to do is not like everybody else. So the customizing the retirement timeline, customizing what you're doing is just so important. And, if you got $1.98 left, put it in your will to give it away to charity.
Pops, you're just, again, spot on this, right? It's about customizing it to your solutions, whether it's your cash flow, your expenses, your lifestyle, et cetera. Don't compare yourself to the Joneses. You're setting up for someone else's retirement plan, and you got to look for your own. Now, the one thing with taxes, I'm going to say, is so many people, and again, our listeners are fantastic. You guys are forward looking, but so many of people out there with taxes are looking in their rear view mirror. They're looking about last year when they're looking at their tax return, what's done. While that's important to do, JT, it's almost a little bit more important in our opinion, right, to be looking through that windshield as you're going through retirement and to say what's coming down the pike. So we got to look at both things at once, but how do you incorporate taxes into conversations with clients?
Yeah, for sure. And right now is tax season, and we are looking at the prior year, 2023. But it's also a really good reminder that tax planning is a 12-month deal, right? Right now, taxes are fresh at the top of our minds. So we should be looking at 2024 and beyond of how can we save taxes over the long term? What should we be doing today to set us up for success later on?
Yeah, that's right. Right. So what are some of those things that are going to be coming up, right, with clients? So how do we kind of look at taxes for last year? What are some snafus or some pitfalls that might come up? And then how do we incorporate that into our planning process?
One thing that we're doing a lot with clients right now is helping them round up all of their tax forms, right? This can be very overwhelming for some people because maybe we triggered some tax consequence or we did something 8 months ago. They forgot about it. And now this 1099 shows up in the mail. And these 1099s aren't very user friendly, right? They can be hard to understand and they can be really overwhelming. I had an experience with just a client this week that brought in the 1099 and said, I have a $200,000 taxable event that happened and I owe $30,000 here. What is this saying? And it said, well, no, let's look back over the last year and see what happened. We had a transfer from one account to another. The transfer is reportable, but not taxable. That's a big distinction there. And then from that same account later on, we did a Roth conversion, which is taxable. So this document can be really hard to interpret, but really understanding what happened there is key. I guess staying sane during tax season, right?
Yeah, those emotional things, right? You get a love letter from the IRS. It doesn't feel very loving when it comes in. And sometimes the IRS makes mistakes and they happen to send you a letter. Or sometimes we read a tax document incorrectly because we get a little emotional about it. And I totally understand that, right? You get your entire life savings, you make a change in there, a transfer, then you get a tax form 8 months later that says, 200,000 is taxable. And it's a little bit of a heart-stopping moment. It's like, oh my gosh, what happened? And we don't look at reading the rest of the document that said actually it was a transfer, it wasn't taxable. We kind of get caught up on that first thing. Dad, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Oh, just to go along with what JT said, we had a client pass away 2 years ago, and then we did the transfer from the IRA to the surviving spouse. And regrettably, individual did their own income tax return and didn't enter it in. So reportable, but not taxable, right? So now we're almost 8-9 months into it with writing a letter to the IRS. Oh no, this isn't taxable. Well, next thing you do, you get a bill for $80,000 plus interest plus penalties. No, you're wrong. And all of a sudden we get caught up in this circle of communication with the IRS. So 8 weeks later, she gets a letter that says, oh, we have your response. We'll respond in 8 weeks. And then in between that, this whole circle goes. So understanding, to JT's point, reportable versus taxable, keeping good records is just paramount because we're going to forget. And all of a sudden that letter comes in from the IRS that just squirrels everybody up. And then it just kind of falls down after that. And that's where the advisors come in, is monitoring taxes all year long, not just at the end of the year for last year, but watching that front view mirror as the windshield as well as the rear view mirror to make sure things are working right. So yeah, kudos to you, JT, for what you're doing with your client.
So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about that kind of forward-looking things. And we talked about it a lot before on the podcast, but Christian, I know you're working with some clients on this too, and you get some questions about the tax planning side of it. You got the TSP, which we say the TSP does several things really, really well, and we love the TSP. It doesn't do everything perfect, which, by the way, nothing does everything perfect. That's why combination and diversification is good. But it especially comes true when it talks about taxes and how that's set up and looking forward. So, Christian, what type of questions are you getting from clients on tax planning for this year?
Well, the one that came from last week, actually, in particular, was, that same concept with Roth conversions was just, should I convert my TSP to Roth? And again, if we're just looking in the news or maybe Googling it, it might be we can find the answer being maybe yes, maybe no. So I've appreciated the question as it came in. But as far as the TSP rules, we wouldn't be able to do the conversion inside the TSP itself. That's one of its flaws. It's one of its downfalls. So in order to actually do a Roth conversion with TSP dollars, you have to first, do that transfer to your IRA, a traditional IRA. Then once it's in a traditional IRA, then you can do the Roth conversion, to Roth. I had a similar question come up as well related to Roth conversions, having to do with an inherited IRA. And they asked that question, which was, can I, or rather, should I do Roth conversions on an inherited IRA? And we aren't able to do Roth conversions on inherited accounts. So if that happens to be you and you have an inherited IRA, cannot do Roth conversions on an inherited IRA. There are, I guess, special rules. If you're an eligible designated beneficiary, you maybe could roll that into your own IRA, but that's going to be a special category in and of itself. If you just have an inherited IRA, you can also do a Roth conversion as well. So it's got to be your own IRA before we can do a Roth conversion.
Christian, to add to that, is one of the things with Secure Act, was pre-Secure Act, Secure Act 1.0, now Secure Act 2.0, you have kind of three sets of competing information online. So when you're reading about inherited IRAs, let's make sure you're reading about the right set of laws. I was meeting with one client. They had two inherited IRAs, one from his side of the family, one from her side of the family. And they have two different sets of rules we're following. And she's like, whoa, how come I got to take all my money out, but he doesn't have to take his money out? And I'm like, well, it's just when the loved one passed away, what set of rules were we following? This is pre-Secure Act rules. It's different than post-Secure Act 2.0 rules. And to make it even better, post-Secure Act 2.0, the IRS isn't even clear in how you're supposed to take money out. Working with a client this week. They got a large inherited IRA, well over into the 7-figure marker. And the large bank they are working with has said, hey, great news. You don't have to take any money out until 10 years. And I said, whoa, pump the brakes. That's actually not what the rules are. You have to start taking money out of this account based on how old your mom was when she passed away. And she's like, nope, Mike, I got an email right here from the bank that says I don't have to take any money out of this account for 10 years. And so now there's a little bit of pushback between now us and the custodian about what the actual rules are and how to work through this. So not only online is there a bunch of confusion because which set of laws you're following, we're actually hearing some incorrect information come from custodians, which makes it so much more challenging for you, our listeners, to get the right information that's out there. So this is always a good time to hit the pause button whenever you're getting conflicting information. Be like, hey, cite your sources, right? Let's go back to the tax code. Let's go back to the IRC, Internal Revenue Code. What does it say what the rules are on how this is supposed to work?
Micah, just one additional point on that to think about. You as the tax filer, right? You're going to do this, and IRS isn't going to send you a letter. They're going to send you a letter when? 36, 38, 40 months past. Said, oh, by the way, let's go back and revisit this. So in your point, if you have a custodian that's sending it to you, I would go back to the custodian and say, if you're incorrect, who handles the penalties on this? And that's something you just have to look at with your advisor. A good tax advisor will tell you document, like Micah said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, it's tough because the IRS right now isn't clear on some of those rules. Our position, we're taking a more conservative position because the penalties are huge if you get this wrong. The IRS may or may not waive those penalties. These are things we don't know. So especially the larger the dollar amount, the percentages, the penalties are in percent. So that means the penalties get a lot larger. We got to be really careful with that. All right. So let's talk about some more positive tax planning though. So I know JT, you're also working with clients. And once we hit 70 and a half, we kind of have some extra really cool things we can do in order to help not only make the world a better place by giving to charity, but even getting, I'm going to say, a quasi-tax deduction for charitable contribution, even if we use a standard deduction. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Once you reach age 70 and a half, you're able to do what's called a qualified charitable distribution. And so this is, we take money from the IRA and send it directly to the qualified charity. So it doesn't come to you. And when you make that distribution to the qualified charity, it's not taxable at all. It's tax-free, right? So again, you're taking the standard deduction. We're not itemizing this contribution to charity, but it's never taxed coming from the IRA, which is fantastic. But again, kind of going back to those tax forms, the tax forms that they send out can be a little confusing because it will show, you'll get a 1099 and it will show that distribution and it comes up as taxable. The custodians, whether you use Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, any of these, none of these companies are categorizing that as tax-free. They're not labeling it as QCD. they're all coming through as taxable because they don't know for sure, right? It's the responsibility of taxpayer and tax preparer to correctly label that as tax-free.
So this comes to the importance, right, of knowing what tax forms come in or working with somebody that really understands these. Then there's some other rules too about QCDs, right? Don't jump out there and just go do them right away. Definitely work with somebody that understands these to make sure you get the benefit. But I love this, and it goes back to that cash flow question. We got some clients that they've done a really good job saving. They're doing all the things they want to do. They're having the memories, the experiences, et cetera, but there's still some money left over and they're choosing to make a world a better place. And that's a beautiful thing with your money and how to set that up. And I know, Dad, you've been pretty proactive in encouraging clients to be more charitable too. So what does that conversation look like?
When you take a perspective of the total financial plan, the first thing you want to do is make sure you take care of yourself, your spouse. That's got to be the most important thing. As you guys, as we preach, surviving spouse benefits is just so important, right? You got to love the family you're with. Number two, when you have kids or grandkids, you don't want to necessarily give all your money to a university or to a charity when you have kids that might be struggling. You might want to put some for some straps on it, all right? We call it incentive planning. And I always tell my clients, after you've done all of this and you got something left, make the world a better place, whatever that is. Church, charity, whatever you believe in, do something, because we're given our talents and we're given our treasures. And what we do with that is so important, unless the IRS is just going to come there and say, well, no one else is claiming it. We'll take it. And that's all part of the planning process, knowing what we want to do. Sometimes it's confusing. You say, I'm going to give X amount of money to the church, and you list all this information down and death occurs, and there's not enough money to fulfill that. So then sometimes it comes pro rata, sometimes it just goes opposite. So just like tax planning, estate planning, that's an annual thing just to take a look at, not just once and one and done, but it's always looking at, always thinking about the windshield as we're driving forward, not the rearview mirror.
I love it. So much great stuff. Quite frankly, I would love for us to sit down and start just going through so much more stuff. But the goal of this is to do a quick podcast with great information, but actionable information for our listeners. So let's kick off with some action items, some things that you can do this week that would help improve your financial situation. I'll go first. I'll say number one is cash flow planning. We've talked about cash flow planning in the past. I'm not talking about budgeting, so don't have a heart attack. Don't go build a spreadsheet with 37 million line items on it of where your money goes. Cash flow planning should be relatively simple, knowing in general how much we spend and in general in a couple categories where that money goes. We've done previous pods on that, so I won't go into more information on it. But look at your cash flow planning. It's so, so important. Christian, what's a second action item our listeners can do this week?
Yeah, related to that is going to be on the retirement income timeline side. So if we go with our cash flow planning and we're still working right now, boom, our retirement income for now is wages is what solves for our income needs, right? But at some point when we transition to retirement, where's our money going to come from? We first need to know when you're going to retire. Then we got to know all the different rules associated with your first pension, right? But start mapping that out and look over the next 10 years. Maybe the next 15, but I don't need to look over the next 40 to say when's our income going to be coming from, but just kind of narrow it down to the next 10, 15 years to really get a sense of where's this dollar is going to come from, especially when it comes to things like the first supplement, when it comes to things like when to turn on Social Security. You need to start coming up with a plan on when certain years are going to happen with our income sources that we might have in the future.
Yeah, that's a fantastic. Now, also with that, right, when we got to think about these future things that are going to be there, JT, what's another action item that our listeners can do thinking about kind of the future and things they should be thinking about?
I would say get another set of eyes on your tax documents. And there can be a lot of mistakes. And whether that's a CPA, another advisor, getting somebody to check your work can be huge.
I love it. Yeah, in that second set of eyes, right? I like to say I am a phenomenal editor of documents, especially emails. Immediately after I click that send button, boom, I know exactly what I did wrong in that email and it's gone. Right? So great news is Google at least has that 10-second undo button, but this is where someone else coming in to look at this before it's filed. I can't tell you how many clients' returns what we have looked at and they said, great news, Micah, we already filed it. Here's a copy for you. And you're like, okay, I guess we're moving to amended return because there's things that we can do on this to save money. Really, really important. Pops, last action item for our listeners for this week.
It's hard to top what you guys have already said, honestly. So I'm going to add rigid flexibility, whether we're looking at the retirement timeline. I like to, when I sit and work with my clients, especially my feds, I ask them for a 1, 3, 5-year outlook. What are we going to do? All right. It doesn't mean it's locked in stone. This is where a thought process is. That comes back to the retirement timeline. I'm going to take a trip to Africa. I need this extra money to go do that. I'm expecting another great grandchild. We want to travel to go see there. So we start ferreting or putting these monies in place. All right. I'd love the idea that how many times, Micah, JT, Christian, have we reviewed a tax return and quite honestly, double the return for the client by finding an error that was made. Oh, didn't you tell your client or your CPA or your tax preparer like this? Oh, I forgot. Omitted return, large check comes back from the IRS because of this mistake. So I like the words rigid flexibility. If you love the guy, the gal that's doing your taxes, phenomenal. Have someone else just QC the work. And I think that's the most important thing, especially between now and April 15th, that the listeners ought to be thinking about.
I love it. And that's something that we embrace as a firm as well, right? So we work as a team. It's not just one advisor looking at things. We like to talk about it together. We like to work together on this to make sure that best information is getting out there. So we try to take our own advice at the same time. All right, you have your action items for this week. And you got to remember, of course, the last one, I'm going to sneak it in there, share this content. Our goal is to help transform the lives of federal employees with better financial information and actions that you can take that improve your life. So click that share button, get this information out there, help this podcast grow so we can help more people. And until next time, happy planning.